Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you joining me again for just a few minutes to talk about growth groups and where we're at, and be reminded of a few important things. I want to say at the outset that on these videos you can comment on them. So if you have questions that they raise or thoughts, please feel free to comment, and others could comment back. I'll of course answer any questions that are unclear, but please feel free to do that. You can do that. We're going to talk about the setting, skill, study, and spirit. So in regard to the setting, of course the setting is the second meeting. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, if you can, send out an email to those who missed the first meeting, just to recognize that they were gone, you did miss them, you are looking forward to seeing them, and if you haven't met them, to meet them for the first time in a way to encourage them to come back. I would, in the second meeting, if anybody missed it all, I would redo the meeting outline that Bethany handed out. There are very important points all through that meeting outline that they need to understand, the commitments they need to be reminded of, understand what they are in regard to the commitment to attendance and confidentiality, and they need to know all the other things in that. Now, I wouldn't elaborate on it, I wouldn't go into detail, but I would hit on it quickly so that they are aware of what the requirements are in the group and how the group is going to be run and what the purpose is. If you didn't have time to go into the servant evangelism project, I'd go into that a little bit more to talk about, and please review the material that Bethany handed out in regard to the servant evangelism project and how that's going to be approached this year. And talk about that, spend 5 minutes talking about that in a little more detail, getting the dates on their calendar, and that gets them thinking about it, and you can go into more details in regard to decisions and how things will work, particularly for your group, than in future meetings, now that you've got them thinking about it. The last meeting is a party meeting. Sometimes what we do is we have the party on a weekend instead of the weekday, and we may juggle that a little bit to get it on so everybody can be there, but it's a little easier for me to get into a party mode, if you will, when I don't have to go to the work the next day and when it can be a little longer than 90 minutes. So that's an option, but get them thinking a little bit about the party, and unless you're just going to do it the regular way, which is fine. Let's see. One person suggested sometimes, when folks are coming in the group coming in the door and they don't initially know one another, there can be silences, and sometimes your groups are not quite as extroverted as other times. A suggestion was made to play a little music in the background to encourage people to talk, cover the silence a little bit. And I thought that was a great suggestion. Of course, the other way to fill that silence, and I would encourage you as a leader to always be greeting everybody as they come in, reaching out to everybody, and if nobody else is talking, you can be asking people questions to get to know them a little better. And hopefully the time won't take too long before you're going to be actually starting the meeting, and that will engage constructive sharing as you lead that time. Let's see, that's the setting. A skill, I guess the skill I would say is the icebreaker question, knowing how to monitor your time during that. And what I would say to that is you don't want to choose icebreaker questions that, one, take too long to think about, or two, people just can't come up with answers. And three, I don't know, but you want to be able to have them be able to think of something fairly readily, be able to share it in a brief period of time. If your group's smaller, you have a longer amount of time to do everything, having everybody participate. If your group is bigger, then you've especially got to monitor the time. So particularly in the icebreaker questions, you want everybody to share. Sometimes I go around, sometimes I just say, who would like to share first, and then I make sure everybody shares, and I'll actually go to the people Now, what about you, Fred? You know, what do you think on this, or what's your answer? And I'll come back, and if people don't want to share, then that's fine. In regard to this study, I would say a couple things. You got the discussion questions there. I have given you some suggestions on managing your meeting overall. That's the first little thing. Just recognizing that you should have a flow and a plan to your meeting, how long you're going to spend, the maximum amount of time, so that you know if you're going over, you know if you're going to be shortchanging yourself at the end of the meeting because it's now 7:30 and you're not done with the icebreaker, or it's now 7:45 and you've gone 15 minutes over. On the icebreaker, it should be clicking, I have 15 less minutes to do everything else I wanted to do. And then you're going to have to make some decisions on where that comes from. I've given you some suggested brainstorming questions. Two of them, the first one I prefer more than the other, and basically it's just to get people to talk about another person in their life and to bridge to the study in regard to who they know, who they've seen in their life that's displayed crazy love. Again, depending on how large your group is, will result in how long you can give people to share the answer. Some people will want to be short. They don't talk a lot. Others will want to be longer. So you'll have to provide some guidance to that. In regard to the discussion questions, I've given you a suggested time frame there as well for kind of each set of questions. And the reason is because you're trying to guide the discussion to get through the entire message, the points of the message, but also ultimately where you're trying to take this is to get people to consider how crazy love has or hasn't been in their life, and are there opportunities for them to display crazy love right now, and will they do that? Will they come to a point where they say, yeah, I want to do that? So that's huge. So that's where you're trying to take it, and that's where the discussion questions are trying to go. In regard to the intro questions, you know, these are simple questions. They're not too complex. What is crazy love? Why is it crazy? It's something they probably understand. They will remember. But you want to get it out on the table. You want to get people thinking about it. And this is just to get their mind going on the subject. Let's see, loving each other and loving others. This is just to kind of bring up the point that crazy love, yes, does go beyond those who typically love you, but there are times when those who ought to love you and do love you and don't, love you, and they will hurt you and let you down as well, and you're going to need some crazy love to respond to them as well. Let's see, living crazy love, doing good to those who harm you. This is just getting into the meat of the message, and I didn't break it down into each single point because I felt we would just not get where we wanted to get. So I kind of wanted to ask the questions in a way where we're looking at the response overall, so that people could pick out one or another in their responses to really emphasize. I would not leave out question number 7. Can you give me an example in your own life when you've been able to respond in the way Jesus said to someone else, whether a Christian or a non-Christian? This is really where somebody can share, if they haven't already, where they've been able to display crazy love to somebody. And that can be a powerful thing when you hear from somebody else that they actually lived out what God wanted them to do, and how that worked and why they did it, and that they're glad they did. Typically, that's why they're sharing it. So that can be very powerful to encourage others in you to live out God's love, live out crazy love as well. Finally, last section, living crazy love, do good at all times. It's just looking at the golden rule that this is not just responding with crazy love when people harm you. But it's like Mike said, it's going out of your way to be proactive, to do something for people, even when they're not harming you, to show crazy love to them. Transition, personalization, prayer time. I wouldn't really say this is the prayer time yet. I would transition it and simply say the last question I have is there a situation in your life right now where you need to apply what Jesus has said here? And you know, I want you to think about that for just a second. You know, maybe it's been there all the time. Maybe God's been bringing it to your mind, and maybe there's something where you need some clarity on exactly what you should do. But you know that it ought to be love. And if any of those situations apply, you know, we're going to be praying in a few minutes, and I would just like you to share that with us, how we can pray for you about that. And if you've got something on your mind or heart that God's been bringing to your mind through this study, maybe you just need to be characterized by crazy love more, and you know it's not there. Whatever, we'd like to pray for you about that. And you may have other prayer requests as well that are even more pressing, and that's fine, or maybe you could share both. But I would just transition right into the prayer time with that. So that's the study. For your spirit, hopefully a bit of encouragement. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 8, and 9. Last time we looked at verse 7, which said, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the surpassing greatness of the power might be from God, and not from ourselves. And then in verses 8 and 9, and I'm going to find it here in a minute, in verses 8 and 9, Paul goes on to say, we are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Paul is saying that as Christians, we are hard-pressed. We are perplexed. We are persecuted. We are struck down. As Christians, we're like earthen vessels, and we're not immune from life's problems and from difficulties, and we're not immune from failure. But we have a treasure that can bring to us the aspect of not being crushed, of not being in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. And what we're trying to do through our growth group is to say, hey, we recognize that as Christians, we're earthen vessels, and we want to have God be living in us and having an impact on our lives, so that His fruit and His Spirit would be seen in us. And so, you know, you can share yourself when you're hard pressed, when things aren't perfect, when you're having difficulty, because that's what God's designed, is for that difficulty, for Him to be seen in your life. And so it's okay for you to share that, and then encourage others to share that, so we can pray for one another, that even though we're earthen vessels, to see the greatness of God in our lives. So hopefully you have a great second meeting. I'll pray that happens. Feel free to email me or comment with any questions.